talk today about a very important halachic topic. The halachic topic is the Kippah. The Kippah, this little thing over here, yarmulke, is really a very, very important sign, perhaps, that someone's identifying themselves as part of the Jewish religious community. And I think it's very interesting to study the history of the Kippah. Where does it come from? You'll be surprised, perhaps, to hear how scarce the sources for the Kippah are. But you should not, based on that, conclude, therefore, it's not important. It is incredibly important to wear a kippah, but I think it'll be a very exciting journey to look at the halachic development of how the kippah has become and remains such an important part of Jewish life, to talk about how it started, how it started, how it came to be that way. So I'm going to hand to Yaakov over there. No, I think I'm blessed with one over here, actually. So really, we're going to divide our discussion, I think, into three parts today. The first part of our discussion, we're going to look at the Gemara, look at the Talmud that talks about various people who at various times did various things concerning kippot. That's the first thing we're going to do. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the kippah in halacha and in the Shulchan Aruch, see how it's mentioned halacha l'maaseh. And then finally, the third part, we're going to talk about various modern sources where people were asked at different times when they might be allowed to take off their kippah, and to see how modern halachic authorities grapple with the question of when should I wear one, or when can I take it off. That's really the three stages. Beseder, Gemara, then the halacha, Shulchan Aruch, and then some modern practical ramifications. Is that going to work with everybody? I might just add what a joy is to see all of you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all, exactly. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Good point, Yaakov. Okay, so the story starts on source number 1, is the Gemara in Kiddushin. The Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Lamed Aleph, tells us a very, very interesting story. This is the statement of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, and this is probably one of the first references to a kippah, but it's not written as a halacha.
He uses a rag for
Huh?
the woman, the widowed woman, the old woman, something like that. But for him it counts, for other people it wouldn't count, because he's a great guy and he needs to wear a kippah, other people don't.
Oh, we're going to come to that. That's source number 2. Excellent. But source number 1 is just a statement about a kippah. It is the words of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said, Asur la'adam she'elech arba amot b'koma zekufa. That it is inappropriate for a person to walk around the world, koma zekufa means like walking around as if you own the place. Are there any Americans here? There are, so I won't say anything. But to walk around as if I'm in charge. Koma zekufa that's not a literal translation, but it's a sort of a sense of presence. You know what I mean? Like, move away, I'm over here. The sort of person who, when you're walking down the street, you're walking down the street and you're both on the same side, and somebody has to give way. So the guy who walks down the street, making it very clear that he's not the guy who's going to budge. I would humbly suggest that is koma zekufa, standing sort of in a very, very present way. That is the words of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. However, Rav Huna, berated Rabbi Yoshua. Now, this is Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yoshua. So this is his son. He says, Lo maski arba amot b'gilui rosh. You shouldn't walk for 4 amot. 4 amot is about 2 meters. So basically, don't walk. Don't walk gilui rosh. Gilui rosh means an uncovered head. Amar shchina lema'ala meroshi. Why? Because by covering my head, I become aware that the divine presence is above my head. You hear that? Now, I've no idea if this is true, but I read the word yamulka. Yamulka
Yiddish.
is Yiddish, meaning
I'd have to speak to the two Yiddish specialists in the room.
kann sein, ich kann nicht. Anyway, so yamulka is, I think it's based apparently on some sort of development from the phrase of yirat kel. Yirat kel, fear of heaven. Yamulka, fear of heaven. I have no idea if that's true, but it's a cute idea. And if it is true, it would be very beautifully connected to the words of Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, who says, Shechina lema'ala me'roshi, that when I have my head covered, I'm aware that I'm in the presence of the divine. Now that's a very good thing. You follow? Now it's not, this Gemara is not cited anywhere as a halakha saying you're not allowed to walk 4 amot.
It's just encouraged to not.
Spot on. Shua, exactly. You're quite right, exactly. It's a suggestion, it's not mentioned as a...
Why are there rabbis that are like, you must wear a yarmulke?
Oh! Ezra, you are so helpful. You're amazing.
Because there's one guy who I'm pretty sure I can relate Shua to, and whenever he doesn't wear a yarmulke, all the rest of my shit are like, put on a yarmulke right now! You're doing an avera!
Oh, Ezra, you are such a gift to every class you're in. Ezra, as you will discover...
Someone in my class that is similar to you. I can compare you to.
We'll just come back to where we're talking. Ezra, your point is an excellent point. Ezra, good point. However, as we will discover, and really I think we're going to come to that in the third part of our discussion, that the halachic requirement to wear a kippah today is far more than based purely on the Talmudic sources. You follow? It has become, and we will discuss when we look at the third section, modern practical applications, the kippah has become very significant. I'm just going to add in brackets, I was cautious, and therefore I will remind you now, the fact that the yarmulke, the kippah, does not have strong sort of halachic basis. It's not one of the 630 mitzvot according to any calculation. That does not mean that it is not very important. It is critical, very important. It is an indication that I'm choosing to identify within the observant Jewish community when I wear a kippah. And when I remove it today, I'm making a statement that I no longer wish to be counted among the observant Jewish community. And therefore it is significant. The halachic basis is one sort of the halachic pedigree, if you can call it that, is one thing. But as we will see in the third part, when we look at modern practical ramifications, don't come to any incorrect conclusions about the very important role that the kippah plays in our lives. Malti, we missed you so much last week.
It's possible to make it similar to a dagger.
Oh, like a sign?
Yeah, to dagger from a state, to a flag.
Ah, yeah, not bad.
The state don't need it. The state exists without it, but it's the most, it's the honored symbol of a state. A state can exist without, but it's...
So I think there's more. I think kippah is much more than that, because we said, according to Rav Huna, in the son of Rabbi Yoshua, it's not just a sign. It is also, it has an impact on me. We're going to see this much more strongly in the story that we're going to read in a minute. Shechina lema'ala me'roshi. I wear the kippah, I become aware that I'm in the presence of the divine. So it's more than just a flag.
But
it is.
But you show for what you belong, to what you belong in.
True.
So if you with a flag, you show you belong to this country.
True.
And you have something to do with this. And with a kippah, we show something similar. We show that we belong to God.
Oh, amazing.
And that's like a dagger for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Quite correct. I agree. I think it's even more than that.
Yeah.
I think it's everything that you said
In this
and more.
in this direction.
Yes. It's everything you said is absolutely correct. It's a badge of honor. It's like a flag saying identify, but it's much more than that. It is also this concept of Shechina Lamala Miroshi. Look at this crazy story that we are about to read that will just corroborate just how powerful the Kippah is. This is a story, it's in Masechet Shabbat. There's a story about Rabbi Nachman, the son of Yitzchak. So Rav Nachman, the son of Yitzchak, said, Ein Mazal Yisrael. It's a very interesting piece of Gemara over there about the concept of Mazal. Do you know what Mazal is?
Yes, lots.
Like destiny, or like things are destined to happen.
Connected to
Astrology, exactly. Meaning,
It's not like Mazel Tov?
well, Mazel Tov is connected. Mazel Tov is a very, very interesting phrase that we're not going to talk about in detail today, but the concept of a mazal is like a destiny. You know, like the stars have it that I'm going to have to, you know, sort of, this is going to be a good day or a bad day. So according to Rav Nachman, the son of Yitzchak, he says that the Jewish people are not controlled by the concept of mazal. Now, I would suggest, although I haven't thought about this well enough, but I would suggest, Yaakov, maybe mazal tov means sort of, you know, like your things have worked out well. So, you know, your current, whatever, you know, we translate it as congratulations, but it's like things have been good for you. Hashem has given you a blessing. That's sort of like the mazal tov, like
good fortune.
Yeah, good fortune, exactly. Excellent. So now listen to this. So the Rav Nachman, the son of Yitzchak, said the Jewish people are not controlled by mazal. How do we know this? We know this from a story. This is Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, lived this story. What happened? Imei de Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amri Lai Kidai Berich Ganva Have. The mother of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, before he was born, went to see some sort of I don't know, what do you call them, fortune teller? Went to somebody or other to find out what's this kid going to be like. And this fortune teller, based on the stars, said, bad news. I'm afraid to say, this little schnibbles here, your son is going to be a ganaf. Your son is going to be a ganaf. He, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, was destined to be a ganaf. This is what his mother, a thief. Thank you, Hirish. His mother found out. Imagine she must have been devastated to hear that her son, based on the stars, is going to be a thief. Now that seems unavoidable, Nachon? So what did she do? What did Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's mother do in order to avert this sort of nature that seemed to be inevitable in her son? Do you know what she did? Lo shavkete gilui reshe. She never let her son walk around without his head covered. He, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, as a little boy, never left any, never interacted with anything in the world without his head covered. Amrale, she said, Kasi roshech. She would say, keep your head covered. Ki hechi de tihavi alach e mata de shemaya uvai rachame. In order that you should always have instilled in you a fear for heaven. And that's how it was. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak never left the house, never sort of walked around, never spent a moment of his waking hours without his head covered. And indeed, like we saw in the previous Gemara, he was blessed with a sense of Yirat Shamayim, God consciousness. Okay, story is good so far, right? Now listen to what happens here. Can you tell there's a twist? Yom Achada. One day, he was sitting down, and there was a wind. Do you know what happened when there was a wind?
You blew it off?
Yes, the wind blew off Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's kippah. And you know where Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was sitting when his kippah blew off?
I want to say by a river.
On a boat.
No, he was by a date palm. A date palm. But not a date palm that belonged to him, a date palm that belonged to somebody else. Yativ Kagaris Tute Dikla. Nafal Galima, on it, his kippah fell out of his, blew off his head. Dali Eine Chazal Dikla. Do you know what happened? As soon as the kippah blew off, he looked up and he saw these juicy, juicy dates that don't belong to him. Don't remember, his nature is to be a thief. He said he climbed up the tree with his teeth in order to get to the dates. Meaning the power, this sort of this instinct to be a thief was, as soon as his kippah blew off his head, that instinct became so powerful he couldn't control himself, and he climbed up a decal. Now, when I'm tired, I find it hard going up the stairs, and this guy climbed up a tree. So powerful was that desire to have those dates. You hear?
It wasn't even to have the dates, it was just to take something that wasn't his.
Yes, good point. Yeah, excellent point. Sure, quite right. It was that desire to get something that wasn't his. Excellent point. See how powerful. Now, we're very grateful now for that one windy day when his kippah blew off his head, because that gave us a sort of a glimpse into how powerful his kippah was for him for every other minute of the day. You hear that?
But it really only has that effect if you'd like it to. I can tell you from past experience, I've done things that
Oi.
should be done with a kippah, and I've done things that should be done without a kippah. It goes both ways. It just depends how you focus on it.
Yeah, I think Shua is correct that wearing a kippah does not guarantee that you will be a tzaddik. I think you're quite correct in that.
I mean, honestly, it doesn't need to be a kippah. It could be a shirt that you wear. It just has to be something that you designate to remember the yoke of Shamayim.
Right. So he said, I mean, the first source was saying there's this sort of on my head, this awareness of something above me. Like when I'm wearing a kippah, I'm aware of something above me. I'm aware that the Shechina Lama'ala Miroshi, which is how we saw in the first source of Gemara in Kiddush in the words of Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua. Yes, but you are correct, Shua, in your assessment that wearing kippah is not a guarantee. But I think what's clear from this story is that for this particular person, in this situation, the kippah was a very powerful tool in order to install in him fear of heaven. And if that's a very powerful tool that was able to install in Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak this idea of fear of heaven, Shechina Lama'ala Miroshi, so it's an incredible gift that today we have this same kli in order to install the fear of heaven in us too. I think that's a fair conclusion. Yaakov.
Apologies if we're going to talk about this later in the shiur, but where does the word kippah come from?
Kippah is a Hebrew word.
It means to cover.
A kippah is like a dome. It's the shape.
Not like kapara.
So it means dome.
No. I don't think it's connected. Like the word kippah is the shape.
Dome.
A dome.
Okay.
Dome.
So whenever there is a dome-like structure in Israel, people say kippah to refer to it?
Yes. For example, I hate to say terrible. You know the Dome of the Rock? Do you know how to say Dome of the Rock in Hebrew?
Something kippah and then tzur is rock.
Kippat HaSela.
Oh, Sela.
Kippat HaSela. Because the rock is a Sela, Kippat HaSela. Yeah. So I imagine that could well, but the kippah is just talking about the shape. But a yarmulke is a description, perhaps. The Yiddish term is like this, may echo this fear of heaven piece that we've seen mentioned in the Gemara. Like kippah is a much more technical description rather than a...
Actual, yeah, I understand.
Yeah. Excellent question, thank you though. I wasn't going to mention that, so thank you very much for asking that question.
Thank you for giving a good answer.
Okay, we've now looked at two pieces of Gemara. There may be others, but they're two that I'm aware of that talk about different people in their their relationship with this idea of covering your head. Let's go now, part B, to look at the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch, the book of Jewish law, codifying when it's required to, when are we required to wear a kippah. Once we've done part 1 and part 2, I think we'll be very, very well placed to think about some modern ramifications of wearing the kippah, which we'll do at the end. Joy, happiness, no questions so far on the Gemara. Machon?
No.
Excellent. Okay, looking forward to that. Moishala, how are you doing?
I am a little very much tired. How are you, Ron?
A little very much. Moishala, I just want to say what a joy it is to see you. And I hope that you're well.
As well as can be expected.
You haven't had anything? You haven't been embeated or anything, no?
I had it for a few days, but I've been very tired lately.
I'm sorry, can I make you a cup of tea or anything? Okay. But say this, we're now going to go to the Shulchan Aruch.
Would the Rob like a cup of tea?
No, thank you so much. But if anyone wants a tea party, speak to Shua, but that's a discussion for another day. Okay, if you go now to source number 3, this is the Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim, the laws of daily living, Ezra. This is what we'll get here in about a month, Bezrat Hashem, in our Mishnah Berurah learning. Here, it says over here, it's talking about the laws of tzitzit. You see that? Mm-hmm. This is the laws of tzitzit. Within the context of the laws of tzitzit, he also talks about the head covering. Look at this. Seder atifato, putting on the talit, kederach b'nei adam, shemitkasim bekisutam v'oskim b'melachtam. When you wear your talit, you should wear it in a way that you would wear any item of clothing. Pa'amim b'kisui harosh u'pa'amim b'gilui harosh. Now, sometimes when you wear a talit, you put it on your head, and sometimes you don't put it on your head. And then he writes, V'nachon, however, ideally, sheyichaseh rosho b'talit. It is preferred that somebody should cover their head with their talit during prayer. Do you hear that?
Right, but that's not a source for kippah, that's a source for kippah during tefillah.
Correct. Yes, quite right. Shua. That is a source for covering your head during prayer. Quite right. We're going to go to the Mishnah Berurah on that piece of Shulchan Aruch. So we said that people wear a talit, and some people wear the talit on their shoulders, and some people wear the talit covering their head. The Shulchan Aruch says you should wear the talit covering your head. On that, the Mishnah Berurah says, Shekisui zeh machnia lev hadam u'mevi'o lidei yirat shamayim. When I cover my head, that machnia lev hadam. Machnia is sort of to subdue the heart and to bring a person to fear of heaven. And then he quotes it, "Shedatot nachon shelo yasir hakov hakatan she'al rosho be'et hatfilah av shehu mechaseh rosho b'hatalit." Gamken. If I'm wearing and he calls it over here, do you hear that? Kova hakatan, my small hat. I would suggest this is probably what he's referring to with the kippah. If I cover my head with my talit, I should not remove my kippah. Keep the kippah on at the same time. It seems that covering my head, machnia lev ha'adam, subdues the heart and brings us to yirat shamayim, to fear of heaven. Now, he's not saying, as Shua pointed out a few minutes ago, that is inevitable. There's certain things that are inevitable. Like if you bang your hand down over here, you're going to hurt. You're that's the inevitable result. He's not saying that whenever you put a covering on your head, you are blessed with yirat shamayim. but it is certainly something that if I do it, and as you were mentioning before, Shua, with intent, when I'm putting it on with intent, there is a potential to use that experience to enhance my Yirat Shamayim, my fear of heaven. It's not something that is inevitable, but it's a wonderful gift to know that exists, that I could harness that, this particular item of clothing, I could harness it in order to strengthen my Yirat Shamayim. Those are the words of the Mishnah Brura, commenting on the words of the Shulchan Aruch, who said that I cover my head during prayer. Yes. Shua.
I pray with a talit, and in the morning I do put it over my head when I wear the talit. And I don't know if it strengthens my Yirat Shamayim, but it definitely helps to focus on the words. It's like blinders on a horse, It's just really what you have in front of you is the words.
Yeah, you're quite right. If you're praying with a talit over your head, absolutely, yeah, quite right. You become much more focused on really the prayer book, to the exclusion of any distractions around you, which he's not talking about here, but it's definitely, you're absolutely correct. It is a very helpful mechanism to focus on prayer. Okay, actually, moving on, our next source is talking about prayer. We now come in the laws of tefillah, we mentioned in passing concerning a talit. I think the first reference in halakha to a requirement to cover your hair, not a recommendation, but a requirement to cover your hair, is in the next source. And as we will see in a minute, even in the next source, this requirement to cover your hair is limited. Do you see it over here? The Shulchan Aruch, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Source number 5. He writes, Yesh Omrim, there are those who say, She'asur lohotzi azkara mipiv berosh meguleh. Those who say you should not utter God's name if your head is uncovered. V'yesh omrim sheyesh limchot shelo likanes beit hakneset b'gilui rosh. And there are others who say you shouldn't enter a shul without a kippah on.
This is all, again, with just specific places. It's not a...
Quite right, we're not going to get to anyone who says that we're required in halakha to wear a kippah all of the time. In the Shulchan Aruch, the Shulchan Aruch is writing here that you should not enter a shul without your head being covered. Why might that be the case?
It's a lack of respect. It's at least my understanding of it is that when you go into a Beit Knesset, that is a place designated for prayer, and when you pray, you're supposed to cover your head. Therefore, if you're in the place, you should be covering your head. Right. Yeah, quite right. Yeah, it's certainly a place that I'm required to show respect.
And this also applies to Midrash?
Yes, sure. Yeah, anytime that you're involved in prayer, let's say, now he's saying over here, anytime you mention God's name, which would mean that whenever you recite a blessing, you should be covering your head. Really, as we know, we just know from looking at the world around us today, we wear kippot all of the time nowadays. It's not that there are times that we wear it and times that we don't wear it. We wear a kippah all of the time. But it seems to be that there are certain times when I mention God's name and when I'm in a Beit Knesset that I need to cover my head. Part of that could be that there's always a concern. It's a very, very difficult thing. There's a concept in halakha known as kalut rosh. Kalut rosh is Hebrew for like frivolity, like messing around, literally it means lightheadedness. And even though halakha sees value, we were talking about this a little bit last week when we spoke about free time. Halakha sees the value in having a good time, in laughing, in relaxing. Sort of lightheadedness is never a healthy state. Lightheadedness is when you're not quite focused, you're sort of a bit flippant, a bit sort of like irreverent, certain sort of like let go a little bit of control. That sense of lightheadedness is something to be avoided. You're allowed to make jokes, assuming they're funny. You're allowed to make jokes, but they have to be like batam, sort of with tasteful. Yeah, as opposed to just chaos. You know what I mean?
Well, there's a difference between being lighthearted and lightheaded.
That's very good. Thank you so much. Light-hearted is not a problem. Light-headed is an issue, and this light-headed is fixed by a kippah. You follow? Like if we live in a place of lightheadedness, so I'm going to mention God's name or I'm going to say a blessing. So I want to bring a certain sense of yirat shamayim, a certain sense of awe of heaven into my life when I'm saying a blessing or when I'm in a Bet Knesset. So the way of sort of coming back down to earth, if I have this light-headed moment, so my kippah will bring me back into the zone. And therefore, even though we obviously wear kippot all of the time, in order to avoid things like kalut rosh, lightheadedness in a Bet Knesset, or lightheadedness when I'm saying a blessing, therefore we are required to cover our heads at all times when we're engaged in these sorts of activities, in order to maintain the dignity of mentioning our Kodesh Baruch Hu, or talking about a prayer.
Which is why you would wear it while you're learning Torah, but not while you're necessarily walking down the street.
Correct. Yes. Nowadays, as I want to mention every minute, just so no one misunderstands, we obviously today, we wear kippot at all times. Obviously, when I'm walking down, that's not something that is sort of, that's something we put on at some times and other times not. In our third section, we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail. Okay, let's do the second part of source number 5. He says, Lo ya'amod. This is really talking in prayer. Lo ya'amod ba'afunato. That's like wearing a bag. V'lo b'rosh megula. You shouldn't walk with your uncovered head. V'lo b'raglayim megulot, and not uncovered feet. V'im derech anshei hamakom shelo ya'amdu lifnei hagedolim ela batei raglayim. You should always wear shoes. Batei raglayim is shoes. He says over here that you shouldn't be involved in prayer with an uncovered head. That's Seif 5. Seif 3 we spoke about you saying God's name with an uncovered head. Here is just talking about if you're involved in a prayer or if you're in a like in a Bet Knesset, then you have to make sure that your head is covered at all times, in order, as Shua mentioned earlier, part of showing respect for the place. Okay, we see the same thing in the following source, Kuf Nun Aleph. He says, you're allowed to walk into a Bet Knesset, you're allowed to go into a synagogue carrying your staff, your stick, your bag. V'yesh osrim, there are those who forbid coming into a Bet Knesset with a knife, with a weapon, or with an uncovered head. Again, walking around with an uncovered head.
Walk into the Knesset at all with a weapon, and we see that from Pinchas.
Say that again, Ezra.
I thought you're not allowed to walk in at all. You're not allowed to have a weapon at all in the beit Knesset.
Correct. That's exactly what we said.
See that from Pinchas.
Yes.
We see that from Pinchas.
Right. Nowadays, it's slightly different. Let's say when the soldiers come into a shul, sometimes, unfortunately, in order to live in safety in our holy land, some very holy Jews give of their time to protect us. And these holy, righteous people have a shul.
As someone from Texas, having a gun with you in the shul, Mamish, enhances the kavanah of your prayers.
Oh my gosh, you're such a crazy person. Thank you so much, Moishe.
I'm serious. Knowing that there is someone knowing that there's someone in your synagogue with a semi-automatic weapon, that you could be surrounded by people with pistols in your pocket. To me, it enhances my prayer.
Oh
because
yeah.
It's his mind that he is.
To me,
I'm
it's
sure,
like,
like,
yes,
here
it's
that
pretty
happens
much,
all
it
the
puts
time.
my,
Yeah,
first of all,
yeah.
it puts my mind at ease, and second, it reminds me that Mamish, at the same time, these Jews are engaged in the physical action of protecting Am Yisrael and in
Yeah.
prayer at the same time.
I know you're so right, Moishala. I'm just in pain. That's the reality. I really understand
It's a painful
you.
reality, but it's the
Yeah, I
reality.
know. Certainly, there've been some terrible shootings. I mean, it's horrible even to think about it. That people sitting in prayer have been attacked, and it's a painful
It
necessity.
happened to a Chabad Shawl like 2 hours away from San Diego.
Yeah.
Or a suburb of San Diego.
Yeah, it's a painful reality that this is required. Unfortunately, it's required. But all things being equal, Bezrat Hashem will come to a more peaceful days. All things being equal, where there's no need for me to have a weapon in the Beit Knesset, then I shouldn't bring a weapon into a Beit Knesset. You know that because prayer, service of God, I'm involved in service of God in order to extend life. In order that we should be able to live long and we should be able to continue in our Avodat Hashem. And a weapon is shortening a life. You follow? So sort of you're involved in an activity in order to achieve A, but you've got on you an item that leads to the opposite of it.
What about a Beit Midrash? Are you allowed to carry
Same thing, same idea. The Beit Midrash and a Beit Knesset. Unfortunately, painfully, even though in an ideal world we wouldn't bring weapons into a Beit Knesset, the necessity, like sort of the tricky situation that so many people are in, make it a necessity despite this requirement. It's pikuach nefesh, to save life.
But Cohn, literally, there's like I saw some rabbis, Machon Meir rabbis, have a gun in
Nachon?
their back pocket,
Absolutely.
teaching class. They don't
Absolutely.
have it out and showing and everything and all. They just have it there just in case something happens.
Nachon?
And they're in the Beit Knesset doing this.
Absolutely, you're quite Ezra. It's a painful reality, and unfortunately, that's where we are, and that's what we need to do. You're right. Yes, multi.
From what time is this halakha? Is halakha from Gemara or comes this later?
What a good question. No, this is earlier. It's cited in the Shulchan Aruch, but I'm guessing it's earlier. But we can look it up if you want.
Because I'm thinking about in the time of Shulchan Aruch it was a different time than today. This was different situation for the Jewish people in this time.
Right.
And even for women rights, now we are free people in this land, or we can go to other countries and they're more or less free.
Right.
To do what we want. But in the time when the Shulchan Aruch was written, it was a different case.
So I think this Shulchan Aruch, this ruling over here, we could look it up in the Torah, but I don't know if. I tell you what, if you don't mind, see the top shelf. No, the one next to it. So go along, keep moving along with the books. I would suggest passing me, if you would be so kind. Probably. Can you see the third book from the end? That book, yes, bingo. But it might not be that book. It might be the book next door. Thank you so much. This is the tour, and we're going to find out if it's the right one. And it is. It is. Thank God for that. Here we go. We're going to go now. Kuf Nun Aleph.
Called The Torah?
This book is a book. A Tur is a Hebrew word for column. A column. There are, or like Tur. It's very, very interesting. Tur is like four like base, like a base of a table. It's got 4 legs, right? So there's a chap. His name is Rav Yaakov ben Osher. He's the son of the Rosh, and he wrote a halacha book called 4 columns, four pillars, right? And then once you've got 4 pillars, you can put on top of it. Do you know what you can put? Put a piece of wood, and then you have a table. So the book based on the Torah is called the Shulchan. You see that? Like you've got the Torah, then you get the Shulchan Aruch. So we're looking at the Shulchan Aruch, but the Shulchan Aruch is based on the Torah. So you asked how old it is, so we're going to have a look now in the Torah. You follow what I'm saying? We're going to go now to Kuf Nun Aleph, Seif Vav. Kuf Nun Aleph.
151.
Thank you so much. Absolutely right. Kuf Nun Aleph.
Is there, sorry?
And in Kuf Nun Aleph over here, we read over here. We were talking about you have to behave in a Bet Knesset. These are the laws. The siman that we're looking at is sort of being a refined individual inside a Bet Knesset. Various things you shouldn't do in a Bet Knesset. Now, this thing about taking a weapon into the Bet Knesset or being there without a cover, without a covering on your head, that is to do with you shouldn't use a Bet Knesset as a way to go round, like to use it as a shortcut. Now, on your point of the weapon, I want to read something for you. This is an unscripted part, but that's the most exciting. Your question is excellent. Thank you so much, Malti. Malti, we read the Shulchan Aruch, right? The Shulchan Aruch was written by Rav Yosef Karo. Rav Yosef Karo, who lived in the 16th century, a book of halakha that has become really the normative book of halakha. Now Rav Yosef Karo, wrote a digest of Jewish law on the Torah, commenting on this book that I'm holding here. He wrote a sort of a digest of halakha, and that book is called the Bet Yosef. Now, you have one book of his which is like a digest of sort of the history of halakha, the Bet Yosef on the Torah, and then you have sort of the bottom line halakha in the Shulchan Aruch. So if you want to see the history of a halakha, you could look in the Bet Yosef. So I'm going to read to you now what the Bet Yosef says about bringing the knife into the shul, right? So he says like this. He quotes a Rambam. He quotes Maimonides. Sha'asur likanes lebeit hakneset b'sakin aruch. You're not allowed to go into a shul, into a Bet Knesset, with a knife, with a weapon. Why?
Long says long knife. Yeah.
Long knife. Not
A long knife.
Not short knife. Long.
No, but that's because it's not like you're not
Like a
cutting.
sword.
Yeah, sword. It means a sword. It doesn't mean you're not cutting up tomatoes. He means a sword. Quite right. Why? Lefi shehatfila ma'arechet yamav shel adam. A prayer will allow somebody's life to be long. Be'ezrat Hashem. Vasakin mekatzram. And when you pray, the sword, the goal of a sword is not to allow someone to live long. You follow, so the two contradict each other.
Well,
you follow that?
Designed to allow the carrier to live longer.
Sure, you're quite right. And then you're quite right, and if it's self-defense, then you can. Now he says over here, likanes bekisor. If you have it in your pocket, nami asur is also forbidden. Ketamrinu shelo likanes lahar habayit. It's based on this idea of not coming into the Temple Mount, and the Bet Knesset is really a sort of a continuation of that. Now he quotes Ein lachush ki im begilui harosh lo yotzi azkara mipiv ad kan lashona. Now he quotes the Rif who argue the Rif is Rav Yitzhak Al-Fassi. Rav Yitzhak Al-Fassi is one of the chaps who you'll find at the back of the Gemara. And he says, it seems, that he's less worried about this weapon in a Bet Knesset. He's more worried about not wearing a kippah. So it seems that according to the Rambam, Maimonides, you would not be allowed to go into the Bet Knesset because the purpose of a weapon is to make someone's life shorter. The purpose of prayer is to make a life longer. So I'm not sure if it comes from before the Rambam, but it certainly traces back at least to the Rambam. And the Rif, Rav Yitzhak Al-Fassi, says that he's less concerned about the weapon, but he is concerned about somebody coming without wearing a kippah. Now, if we had more time, we'd go earlier in the Bet Yosef. This could well be based on the Talmud at the end of the Masechet Megillah that talks about respect for a Bet Knesset. I'll leave it here for now. You don't need to get up. Okay, thank you very much for your question. So it seems that it's old. This idea is at least back to the. But if it's a Rambam, then it must be from the. It's from the Gemara, because the Rambam doesn't make anything up. He just takes things from the Gemara. He doesn't say where it's from, but I'm guessing, perhaps it's from the Gemara at the end of Masechet Megillah that talks about the holiness of a Bet Knesset.
Only my question. This was only this question. Shulchan Aruch have many minhagim included as halakha.
Ah, you're right. So we see it's earlier.
This was the reason for my question.
Excellent. So you now have an answer to your question.
Yes.
And the truth is, we want nothing more than answers to Marty's questions. That is the purpose of this shiur. Nachon. Okay. Is everything clear until now? I want to add, with your permission, one final point. We said, finally, in the laws of Bet Knesset, that you shouldn't come into a Bet Knesset with an uncovered head. The Biur Halacha. Now look at this. This is very, very interesting. The Biur Halacha was written about 100 years ago by Rav Yisrael Meir Kagan. Nachon? He wrote the Mishnah Berurah, and he wrote the Biur Halacha, and he also wrote... Yes, bingo! He wrote the very important book called the Chafetz Chaim, which it used to be over here. Maybe it's... I don't know, anyway.
I think they're up there.
Huh?
I think they're up there.
Is it? Okay, amazing. Good. A very, very important book that sort of formalized halachot pertaining to the way that we speak to and about others. Now, the Biur Halacha, so this is him. He writes, explaining what's the problem with going into a Bet Knesset without a kippah. Why dafka there? You know, what's the problem? So he writes like this, Afilu b'makom shenoagim lelechet ken lifnei asarim. Even if you are accustomed, people are accustomed, generally not to cover their hair, not to cover their head. In some places, it is a sign of respect not to cover your head. I know in England, sometimes...
If you wear a hat, you take it off indoors.
Yeah, no, not yeah, that's true. But also, let's say, if they were... Sometimes when you sing the national anthem, when I was a kid, it makes me feel very old. I don't know if this is a memory of mine or if I'm imagining this. But I'm going to say what...
It happens to me a lot too.
Really?
No, Rob, you
So I'm
never
gonna
say God save the king. You always saying God save the queen.
That is true, quite right. But I think when I was a kid, people would take off if they were wearing a hat, and they'd put their hat on their chest, and they would...
If you go to a baseball game when they sing the
Just
national
like-
Or a hockey.
Ah! So you see that? So even in a place where the respectful thing to do, that's what he's saying over here, even in a place where the respectful thing to do is to remove your head covering, and I'm going to say that was referring to singing the national anthem in England. Now, once in a while, when I was a little boy, we used to go to like classical music concerts, which were absolutely beautiful. It's just anyway.
I thought you were say to watch footy.
No, I never did that. Anyway, so you go to a concert, and sometimes if it was a big enough concert, at the end of the concert, they would play the national anthem. And when they played the national anthem, everybody would stand up, and those people who had a head covering would take off their head covering and would put it on their chest. So even if you're in a place where the respectful thing to do is to remove your head covering, so you might have thought, Bet Knesset, show respect, remove my head covering. No. Nevertheless, Zeo derech kalut rosh. It is not to have a head covering, is kalut rosh. Kalut rosh is light-headedness. Mipnei hamakom. Mean light-headedness with respect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki'ilu ein alav morash china. As if there is no fear of heaven. Don't forget that the guys in the Gemara at the beginning, do you remember? We saw Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Rabbi Yoshua, would cover his head. Why? Because he would say, Shechina lema'ala meroshi. When my head is covered, I'm aware of the divine presence above me, indicating when I take it off, I'm less aware that the divine presence is above me. You follow? And therefore, it would lead to lightheadedness with respect to my relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore you keep it on. Ksheyesh lo kova barosho, when you have your head covered, yesh lo ema, you have awe, the koved rosh lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and a sense of koved rosh, a sense of like you can feel that you're in the presence of the infinite. You hear that? And therefore explains the Biur Halacha, that's why it is important to wear a kippah in a Bet Knesset. Joy, happiness. With this, we conclude part A, part B, I'm so sorry. Part B. Conclude part B, which is our discussion of halachot of wearing kippah, not wearing kippah, in the sources, in the Gemara and then in the Shulchan Aruch. Now, practical modern applications. I want to talk about 3 scenarios. There's quite a lot of Hebrew here, so I'm going to describe 3 scenarios. The first one is not on the sheet, but I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story, even though Ezra didn't ask a question. Normally, I like to tell stories in order to avoid answering your questions. But here, I'm going to tell an unprovoked story. Unprompted story, exactly, an unprompted story. And I want to hear what you think about this situation. So I work, as you may know, assisting Olim integrate in Israel. A couple of years ago, about 2 years ago, I went to visit a school. In order to see if this is a school that would be suitable for Olim or not. The school was a non-religious high school. It was a non-religious high school, and the school had recently hired a new teacher to teach Tanakh. They just recently hired a new teacher to teach Tanakh, and when I came to the school, this new teacher, religious teacher, teaching, happened to be sitting in the head teacher's office with her, and he asked her a question. I thought the question was so interesting that I stayed to hear what she said. He said, I know that this is not a religious school, and I know, because it's not a religious school, none of the boys in this school wear a kippah. However, I think that this is here, there happens to be a Tanakh. This is our holy book. We were talking about holy books earlier, Ezra and I. This is our holy book. I think out of respect for learning the holy book, learning Tanakh, in my class, when I'm teaching Tanakh, I would like to ask the boys in my class to wear a kippah. So he said that to the head teacher, and the head teacher responded and said, no, I don't want them to wear a kippah in your class because I don't want the boys to think that you have to wear a kippah in order to study Jewish texts. Meaning I can be non-religious and I can still study Tanakh. I don't have to connect it to wearing a kippah. And there was the debate between them. It was such a beautiful moment. And I was torn about it. So I actually I have a cousin. My father has a cousin who is a professor of Tanakh in one of the universities here, and I asked him, because he's a very open person, he teaches Tanakh to all different types of people in the university. I asked him what he thought. Do you think the boy should wear a kippah or not? Anyway, so that was a question. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Shua.
I agree with the teacher, and the reason I agree with the teacher is that is my practice myself. I do not always wear kippah. But when I'm learning any religious anything, even if it's something I don't necessarily want to learn, out of respect for it, you put a kippah on. Out of respect for the Beit Midrash, you put a kippah on. When you say a bracha, you put a kippah on.
Right.
So yeah.
No, excellent. So you're with the teacher. That is excellent. Thank you very much.
On the note from all the way in the beginning of the class, where the Rav said, when you take it off, you're separating yourself from the established religious world, I don't view it that way.
I know you're quite. We're going to talk about that now.
Also, same thing like me. When you go to the Beit Midrash, when you say a bracha, when you go to the Beit Knesset, you wear a kippah. Otherwise,
yeah, I understand that. Yeah, you're quite right. When I say you're quite right, I mean that's a legitimate position. I think that we'll look at how various rabbis deal with various questions concerning kippot. There are three scenarios I want to discuss. This is the first of the three. Let's go. We're going to go to Moishela, then we'll go to Yankala, and then we'll go to Malti. Is that okay?
So, from the Baal Tshuva point of view, it makes me think of the circumstance in which you have a very secular Jew who doesn't wear a kippah, but who might have a religious friend. And I like to imagine if this secular Jew were to think in his mind that I could not study Torah without wearing the kippah, let's say hypothetically he has a more religious friend who just so happens to share something on social media, an article on a Jewish website. If this secular Jew thinks, well, I'm not wearing a kippah so I can't study Torah, he would see this article and think to himself, well, I can't read this article because I'd be studying Torah. So the fact that that idea that you must wear a kippah in order to study Torah could, in its effect, exclude a Jew from studying Torah, because it could be the little Chabadnik that lives in my neshama would say it could be that reading that article would be the thing that pushes him over the edge to becoming BT.
Oh, and if you're going to limit him and say don't read it until you put on a kippah, you're preventing him from having that opportunity.
Yeah, it could prevent him from learning Torah.
So we have an argument here. That's good.
Yeah.
Interesting perspective. Thank you, Moishela. You're saying why limit if someone's learning Torah? Okay.
If you're not doing it out of respect, then you really shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, the truth is it connects a little to what we were saying before.
Go into the Beit Knesset and you, the example I have is not so nice, but for the argument's sake, if you go into the Beit Knesset and you relieve yourself and then pray, you're not allowed to do that either. It's better not to pray.
Right.
Do that. Not even the Beit Knesset. The Shulchan Aruch clearly says you cannot pray near certain stones,
absolutely,
certain objects.
absolutely.
Back to my example, why would he open the article if it weren't for curiosity?
But it's very hard. It's very complicated.
Is curiosity not respect in a way?
Yeah. Can we go? I just want to go to Yaakov's perspective and then Malti's, and then maybe we'll come to some
a card that I learned from you, which is not to answer the question at all.
Brilliant, excellent.
And so
Thank
all
you.
I will say is I think that in this discussion and probably the subsequent ones, which we'll also talk about, is that the question is, what is the goal? Is the goal in the Tanakh class to what's the goal of the teacher in mind? Why do they want to wear kippah? Do they want to wear kippah to show respect, or do they think it will enhance the learning experience in some way? Because I assume that if someone's an educator, their goal is, well, to educate the classroom. And so I think the question be, how does that enhance the learning experience itself for the students?
Good question.
I even actually went up. It's not even answered the question. I asked it. I responded with a question.
Yeah, my gosh, I'm so proud of you.
I'm learning.
Oh, that's amazing. Well done. You should be blessed to be able to do that. That's brilliant. Thank you for avoiding question.
Thank you for teaching me the way.
But still giving a perspective on the question.
Yes.
Malti, what were you going to add?
I think it's important to make a statement that this is not a book for atheists that can simply study this like Kant,
Right.
or like Oedipus.
Right.
This ancient Greek things. This is not the same. And if he is a religious teacher, that it's okay that he requests that the students need to put a kippah on out of respect, not because he push to them that they become religious because of different reason, because of the reason of the statement. That this is not a book of atheism.
Right.
This is not that he. This is a complete different category to teach them to become religious or to educate them. But it's something completely different to make the statement. This is not a book of atheism. It's not like Oedipus, not like Kant.
Excellent. The truth is, it's similar to the truth. There's a little echo of all of them. Yes.
That doesn't matter if this book will in end affect the students or not. This is something completely different. It's simply only a statement.
Right. I'm afraid to say everybody other than Moishela, when I spoke to my cousin, his name is Rabbi Cohn, when I spoke to him, he said, similar to what you were saying, the truth is what you were saying, I think that the goal is to have respect for the text. He's saying that this text, the Tanakh, is not just a book of literature. It's not, you have to view the Tanakh as it's our heritage. It's telling our story. It's huh?
It's not even just the Tanakh. It's the Talmud.
No, but in that context, it was the Tanakh. But you're quite right. Any book of Jewish learning, it's not just a book. It's telling our story. And
just in this room, we're not learning any Tanakh. We're all learning Kippah.
Nachon, quite right. Yeah, if I'm involved in Torah, a moment that I'm involved in Torah, so then he would demand, even if somebody is not religious, they would need to wear a kippah. I know sometimes in our home, we live in Katamon, if there are people that come to us for a Shabbat meal, sometimes people come to us for a Shabbat meal who are not committed to an observant lifestyle, and they would not normally wear a kippah, but we would always require somebody to wear a kippah at a Shabbat meal. Because a Shabbat meal isn't supper. You're not coming for supper. It's not like a birthday meal. We're celebrating Shabbat together. I'm learning the book of our story. You follow? And therefore, even somebody, and I'm afraid, Moshe, even if it would mean you'd be closing off the potential possibility of somebody, reading or not reading, then he would certainly the cousin would say concerning Tanakh, but I would expand it beyond that to other things. That I think that there's a certain respect for certain aspects of our religious life that would require you to wear a kippah. Yes.
Can I finish with one more statement? And I told you this particular story because it's a 100% true story that happened to me. So.
Oh my gosh! Oh, Moshe, you can't do that. Oh wow!
That was you.
So it's a good thing I had not attended. Yeah, it happened to me a couple times.
Moshe, that is
it's
amazing.
A good thing that I had not attended the Rav is telling me.
No, but that's different. I'm talking about if we're studying together. I think if you're invited, it's part of it. It's to do as part of a community. What's up? The way that somebody reads an article in the privacy of their home, that's sort of less relevant. You know what I mean? Trying to get myself out of this one.
I like how you say privacy.
Yes. Okay, that is issue number one. I liked very much the idea of a kippah presenting respect is very much in line with what Shawl was saying. Yes.
I'd just like to reinforce the respect aspect. I've got grandparents that are not religious. They're traditional, but they're not religious in any way. When they come over for Shabbat or for Pesach or Sukkot, or if they're at Beit Knesset, my Saba puts a kippah on, even though technically he doesn't need to. I have grandparents that are not Jewish at all, and at my bar mitzvah they were there, and he really didn't need to wear a kippah, but he wore the kippah on the Beit Knesset as a sign of respect. It's the right thing to do.
Amazing. That's absolutely amazing. That is exactly excellent point. Thank you. My example pales into, because those are much more powerful examples. Okay, I'll use your example. Next time I study with someone, I'll say, I won't use my story, I'll use yours. That's very good. Okay, I'm going to summarize with your respect. with your permission, people. Now, these questions that I'm going to talk about now are really very dated. The first question over here is from the Shut Melamed Leho'il. Melamed Leho'il is Rav David Tzvi Hoffman, who lived in Germany in the 19th century. But there's a very similar question that appears in the 20th century, the 1960s in America, by Rav Moshe Feinstein. I just put this question, but both questions are quite similar questions. And they were asked, would I be allowed, well, they're similar questions. The question over here is, somebody has to appear in a courtroom, a non-Jewish courtroom. In this one over here is in 19th century Europe. And you have to take the oath and you have to present your case. And it's terrible to say, I hope this would not be true today, but it may have been true then. The guy is worried that if he were to show up into court wearing a kippah, I mean, whether consciously or unconsciously, that might sway the judge's decision one way or another. And he wants to be sure to have a fair trial. Would he be allowed to go into court, swear that he's telling the truth without wearing a kippah? That's a question of Melamed Leho'il over here. Question number one. Yes.
I just want to say I've heard of a very similar question, almost exactly the same thing. But it's that when you do the swearing, oh wonderful, there's a Chumash right here. When you do the swearing, they have you, if you're a Christian, they have you put your hand on a Christian Bible. But especially today, they have available others. Like they'll have a Tanakh, they'll have a Quran, they'll have whatever everyone else uses. And I know that there was a question that was, by me asking for a Tanakh and the judge seeing me swearing on a Tanakh could possibly sway their opinion. So would I be permitted to take that oath on the?
Oh my gosh! Good question.
To prevent the judge's opinion.
Oh my gosh, that's a good question, which I'm going to avoid. Kamin Hakippah Kodesh.
Thank you, Hirsch.
But I do,
I could go to prison.
Yaakov, you're forcing me to do things much more overtly.
Yes.
I used to be much more subtle about it, but
I
now,
know, but you-
like you keep on pointing it out.
You should give it away a bit.
It doesn't help. Shua, yes.
I know the Rav wanted to avoid the question, but I will answer the question because you're not allowed to swear on the Tanakh, period. You're not allowed to swear in Hashem's name. You're not allowed to swear. It's a direct mitzvah in the Torah.
Like swear or
And honestly, if I was a judge in a court and I saw a Jew swearing on a Tanakh, I would dismiss him as a witness immediately because it's a complete contradiction to what he believes in.
So we just don't swear.
It doesn't make any
But
sense.
no, well, here's the thing. The sight of a Jew with a Tanakh, and the Jew says, "I affirm,"
That's actually
versus the sight of a Jew with a sight of just a person with the Christian Bible saying, "I swear." Because just like you can, like for practice, you can quote, you can say Hashem's name for teaching or for practice, even if you're not saying a bracha. So you can say the words. I could put my hand and say, I do swear to say the truth, the whole truth, the
Right,
truth.
right.
I'm not saying this because I have the kavanah of I'm swearing. I'm saying this just because I'm in a goyish courtroom and I have to say it.
Right.
I'm saying this not because I mean it. I'm saying this but that's
The truth is, these are good questions, but they're off. I want to add the second question. So I want to go back to the kippah. The question that Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked, I'm going to say it's the 1960s, but it could be in the 1950s. But it was around then. If you remember the Jews that came to settle in America after the Second World War, and perhaps even, also the early 20th century as well.
From the Pale of the Settlement.
That's right. Ellis Island. They would all come to America, and as you know, it was very, very hard to find employment. And there were Jews that asked Rav Moshe Feinstein, would I be allowed to not wear a kippah in order to, when I go for my interview for a job, because I feel, rightly or wrongly, I worried that wearing a kippah might have a negative impact on the chance of me getting the job. Would I be allowed to show up to the interview without wearing kippah? More than that, would I be allowed then to continue working without wearing a kippah? Or would I be required to wear a kippah all the time? Now, Rav Moshe Feinstein's answer, as well as Rav David Tzvi Hoffman's answer over here, is very, very instructive. They both, in different contexts, but they both come to the same conclusion that the person would not be required to wear a kippah. Why? Because you have a mitzvah. Yeah, pikuach nefesh, basically. And it was not exactly pikuach nefesh, but I have a responsibility, my responsibility to provide for my family, my responsibility to, ensure a safe trial, whether my calculation is correct or incorrect, but the value of the kippah, even though it is critical, and we can talk about it in more detail, as we've even seen in the earlier sources, but I'm not breaking a halacha. You follow? All things being equal, and certainly here in Israel, there's no reason not to wear a kippah. But there are certain situations that I could imagine that in those times that people would take off a kippah. I'd like to think these stories were written in the 1960s, 19th century, mid 20th century. I would like to hope and pray that by the time that the world that we live in today is sufficiently tolerant and open. Don't forget, the world in the 1960s was far less multicultural than it is today. Different people with sort of bringing all sorts of international influences to major international cities. I would like to think that a kippah does not stick out today in the business districts of the capitals of the world in the same way as a kippah might have stuck out in these, sort of like these power, sort of, these very, very important places as they did 150 years ago. And therefore, I wonder whether these limitations or these permits to remove a kippah then would still be relevant today. All of this, of course, I think Medina, the fact that we're blessed to live in the state of Israel, has really had a big impact on the kippah. I can wear my kippah with pride and identify as part of the Jewish people around the world without that sense of fear. And therefore, even though in those examples they were allowed, indicating that it's not something, forbidden, I would hope that today people would view the situation differently. Okay, I've finished point number 2. I've got one more question to ask you, but before we come to the last question, we'll do your comments.
Very small aside. I actually would disagree with what you just said there about because especially go the early 20th century Jews. There was obviously much less Jewish population in this land, and there was many more Jews that were integrated into European society. So specifically in European businesses and everything, there would have been much more Jews then than there is now. So if anything, I'd say a kippah would stick out a lot more now than it would even back then, because there's far less Jews.
But the people that were integrating were taking it off or never wore it to begin with.
I'm sure there were some here and there.
But I take London. I know London better than other places. Mm-hmm. So in London in the 90s, even when I was a kid, when you went on the tube in London, everyone looked pretty much the same. Like in the 1970s, like bowler hats and stuff. Nowadays, we're like in a multicultural society that I think that what society tolerates have brought, they're sort of more open to different people doing different things, and this requirement that everybody needs to comply to one norm. So it's less to do with the number of Jews, it's more to do with being in a slightly more open society today.
I do agree with
and therefore I would really hope and pray for all of us that we would never be in a situation where we'd feel uncomfortable. That would be, I hope that we live in a world that's tolerant enough that we wouldn't feel uncomfortable.
Apologies to double up, but have you ever experienced have you ever experienced anything when you were growing up in the UK regarding your kippah, like anyone calling you out or anything like that, like on the tube or wherever that may be?
So, well, it just happened just now, but I did get smashed in once or twice, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, as a kid, but it didn't.
When you were wearing kippah at that time.
Yeah. Yes. The truth is, I was playing tennis and I once got smashed in by these people. But I'm not sure if they thought I was rubbish at tennis or if I was wearing kippah. I'm not sure. They didn't make it clear to me what was the
Instigator.
yeah, what made it important.
Kind of mean. Like if you're gonna beat someone up, at least tell them why.
Yeah, no, but I think I think it may have been my Jewish identity. Anyway, I want to go to my last question, but I'm so excited to preface that with a question from Hirsch.
So we were discussing Jews in Western Goyish courts putting their hand on the Tanakh, and I'm thinking if it is asur to swear on Tanakh, as Shua says,
They
we
allow
can't
you
swear
to say
off.
affirm. No, they allow you to say I. They say to you, repeat after me. I do swear or affirm. And you could say I affirm.
Oh, I'm so happy Moishela is in this
We
class.
can't do it on
Moishela, thank you for that.
Like,
we can't do it on the Christian Bible because, from the perspective of Hazal, Christianity is polytheistic idolatry.
Correct.
Absolutely asur.
Correct.
Islam, much more nuanced, but we can't do that on a Quran either because it's not Yahdut.
Yeah, it's not our book.
So, if we really have, Moshe basically said you don't have to do it on a book, but if we did have to, we can do it.
The statement that we take when a Jew stands in court and wants to confirm that they're going to tell the truth, they do not say I swear, they say I affirm.
Swearing is asur?
Swearing is asur. It's asur.
Correct. Affirming is all right. But
So we can affirm on the Tanakh.
Correct. Okay, I'm going to go now, with your permission, with this. This is our final question, final modern application of our kippah sort of dilemma. I do hope, please God, at the end of today's class, we will all wear our beautiful kippot with pride, reminding ourselves of the incredible stories of people who really felt this connection with the divine through this, through having this sense of koved rosh. Literally a heavy, something weighing down my head. Anyway, this is the question. This question was asked.
Is pledging the same thing as swearing?
What?
Pledging.
Yes, I think so. But I'm going to leave that question for 1 minute because it's not so much our topic. But this question is our topic. A question asked to Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked by some yeshiva students. I'm not sure if he was asked or if he might have stuck this as a footnote to one of his questions. Yeshiva students, this is really connected to the one where he said you could remove your kippah in order to be able to work in comfort. Obviously you would then put it on for prayer or for eating, but you'd wear it, take it off other times. Let's say a religious person wants to take part in a non-religious activity. We were talking about free time last week. Or let's say you want to go to the movies. Let's say I'm going to go to the movies and the film I'm going to see is not perhaps ideal. Would it be okay, because I don't feel comfortable sitting in there wearing my kippah, would it be okay for me to remove my kippah? Maybe it'll be a chil Hashem, religious people here in the cinema when they should be steiging in Machon Meir, learning Torah till late at night. Would it be okay for me to remove my kippah?
You just shouldn't go to the place.
And Rav Moshe Feinstein said,
No, you just shouldn't be there to begin with.
well, we said you can't take it off. That is not it's not, if I'm embarrassed about wearing my kippah, then you probably shouldn't be there. You know what I mean? Which I think is a very, very useful rule of thumb. We're talking about the impact that your kippah has on you. And I think it's a very, very useful thing to think about, that there are certain situations, and you should know that there are certain situations in which people have been allowed to remove their kippah. He was allowed people if they're worried about paratah. I hope that wouldn't be true today, but it was true at his time when they said you could remove your kippah. But if there's ever a place that I might go that I would be embarrassed to be walking around there with a kippah, then I would humbly suggest, based on Rav Moshe Feinstein, that's probably a place that you shouldn't be.
I did that in Belgium when I was flying to Israel for the first time. I flew to Belgium. Brussels Airlines. Now
It's very embarrassing to be in Belgium.
Yeah. That's not very nice.
Yeah.
But Belgium has a history. Very recent. It's very recent. I'm sure you see stuff on the news that stuff happens there. And I mean, I knew I would have been in the terminal, and there'd be a big sign that says Tel Aviv. But still, like for that particular few hours.
I mean,
did
like,
bring
how
up my
often do you
kippah.
see people get curb stomped at an airport? You know.
No, but I don't.
Live leak?
I don't know about it in Belgium, but I know definitely in Britain that there was a religious Jewish man who was walking on a bus or something, and all of them were saying, "I've got foreskin, I've got foreskin."
That was on a Belgian.
Okay,
that was
we're
on a
gonna-
Belgian flight.
We'll
That was on a
pause.
Belgian flight.
We'll pause this point, people. Well, I think the last
And it's a thing to
question.
bring a gun or
The
like him in the
Harsh.
face,
We're going to conclude with
I can't put any-
Yaakov.
I have a slightly tangential, but actually a somewhat relevant question. So
Well,
for
we
example,
do that.
In the bathroom, you're not allowed to pray. You're not allowed to bring like a siddur into the bathroom because the bathroom is considered like a non-holy space. Should you take off your kippah?
What an excellent question. That is an excellent question, and the answer is no.
Why?
Because it's true that it's not a place to be involved in Torah study, and it's not a place for me to be thinking Torah thoughts. But there's nowhere that I would be unaware of God's presence. You follow? There's a difference, I think, between being involved in Torah study or Torah thoughts and just being aware of God's presence. And the kippah isn't about study or prayer. I mean, it's not a tool for study or prayer. It is a way of being aware of God. It's as we spoke about, like the thief, and bringing some sort of dignity to my life, koved rosh, as opposed to lightheadedness. So the function of the kippah is not diminished in the bathroom, and therefore there would not be a requirement to remove it. It's not a study tool. It's more of a
It's more of a passive thing.
Correct. It's not about studying. It's more about being sort of living a meaningful day rather than a light-headed day, and I think that meaningfulness is relevant in all parts of our lives. Sweet people, with that we bring our fascinating discussion to a conclusion. We spoke about the beginning. We looked at the rabbis, the very powerful impact that the kippah had on Rav Nachum Bar Yitzchak, who ran up the tree. We looked at halakha. The focus is primarily on avoiding kalut rosh. It seems to be that there's lightheadedness and there's sort of conscious living. And the kippah brings me to a more conscious living as opposed to a lightheadedness.
And you don't want lightheadedness while you're praying.
Correct, absolutely. You want to avoid this lightheadedness. And it seems to be in the modern society, this necessity for sort of a slightly more mindful existence, and this avoidance of lightheadedness is relevant not just in the prayer experience, but at all times of life. And I very, very much like, I'll stick this in at the end, this idea of the flag that Malti mentioned earlier, that my kippah today has been, meaning sort of in the world in which we live today, has become far more significant than purely its halachic relevance. It has also become my way of saying that I identify within a particular community, and since we all identify within that community, we should all with pride wear our kippot all of the time. Yishar koach to all of you. Have a wonderful evening. Yishar koach. Of course you can ask a question.
This has nothing to do with our shiur. I asked
Oh,
a question
brilliant.
about Weinberg probably a
I'm
month
going
and
to
a
turn
half
this
ago,
off. Sorry.
And he said, and he kept on saying he'd get back to me, and he never got back.